Okay, let's just try a little thought experiment. Imagine you walk into a government office. Any office, really.
Sure.
Maybe it's the municipal corporation because, your street has looked like the surface of the moon for about 3 years.
Right. Or you've applied for some permit and it's just vanished.
Exactly, vanished into the ether. So you walk up to the desk and you ask the officer, where is my file? Or how much money was actually spent on this road?
And in the, let's call it the old world,
Hmm.
that officer would probably just look at you, maybe laugh and say, who are you to ask?
Or they'd just point to a huge, dusty pile of files and say, it's in there somewhere, come back next month.
The classic runaround.
The absolute classic. The bureaucratic stone wall. But today, we are diving into a document that, well, it took a sledgehammer to that wall. We're looking at the Gazette of India Extraordinary.
Specifically, the issue from December 22, 2005.
And to get really specific, we've got the Marathi text of the Right to Information Act 2005.
It's interesting that we have the Marathi text. It's a great reminder that this isn't some abstract document just for lawyers in Delhi. It's a law that's meant to be read and used in every state in the local language.
Yeah, that's a great point. And look, legal gazettes are usually about as exciting as watching paint dry. We all know that.
Yeah.
But this one's different. I've actually heard people call this a weapon of mass transparency.
Huh.
It sounds a bit hyperbolic, but looking at the text, is it...
I don't think it's hyperbolic at all. You have to remember the context here. For decades, India operated under the shadow of the old Official Secrets Act from the British era.
Where everything was secret by default.
Exactly. The government's default setting was secrecy. The citizen was a subject. You got what the government decided to give you. This act, the RTI, it just flipped the polarity completely.
How so?
It effectively says the government doesn't own the information. The public owns the information. The government is just holding it in trust for you.
Wow, that is a massive psychological shift. But let's be real for a second. We've all seen laws that look beautiful on paper.
Oh, sure.
Every citizen has the right to clean air, for example. But in reality, it's a completely different story. Does this document actually give me, a regular purser, the mechanics to force that transparency? Or is it just a nice idea?
No, this is all about mechanics. That's why we're doing this deep dive. This isn't a manifesto. It's an instruction manual. It defines exactly what information is, how you ask for it, the specific deadline the officer has to meet, and the penalties they face personally if they ignore you.
Okay, so let's get into the gears of this machine. If I want to use this, I first need to know who I can use it on, who's accountable here. Is it just the big ministries in Delhi?
And that's where the definition of public authority in Chapter 1 is so critical. Obviously, it covers the government ministries, state legislatures, parliament. That's the easy part. But the net is so much wider than people realize.
I noticed that. It mentions bodies established by the Constitution, sure, but then it has this really interesting clause about non-government organizations, or NGOs.
Right, and this is a huge point of contention and also of power. The Act says that if an NGO is substantially financed, directly or indirectly, by funds from the government, they fall under the Act.
So wait, if I'm running a private organization, but I'm taking a massive government grant to, I don't know, build rural toilets or something, I can't hide my book.
Precisely. The logic is simple.
Yeah.
If you're using public money, you are answerable to the public. You can't just hide behind the private entity shield if your fuel is taxpayer cash.
That makes sense. Okay, so that brings us to the what. What can I actually ask for? I think most people assume RTI is just a Q&A. Why is the water cut? When's the power coming back?
Yeah, that's a common misconception.
But looking at the definitions here in the text, information seems to mean, well, pretty much everything.
It is incredibly broad.
Yeah.
I mean, the text lists records, documents, memos, emails, opinions, advices, press releases, circulars, orders, logbooks, contracts.
Logbooks is interesting. That's really granular. That's like, what time did the truck leave the depot?
Yeah,
Granular.
Exactly. But the part that really, I think, emphasizes the power of this act is the inclusion of samples of materials.
Yeah, explain that to me, because when I read samples, I'm picturing a physical object.
That's exactly what it means. Let's go back to your pothole example. The government claims they laid a brand new road last month. It's already broken.
A familiar story.
Right. You suspect they used a substandard mix. Too much sand, not enough good material. Under the RTI Act, you don't just have the right to see the contract for the road. You have the right to demand a sample of the material used in that road.
Hold on. So I can literally ask the government to give me a chunk of the asphalt so I can go get it tested.
Theoretically, yes. And you could immediately see why that would terrify a corrupt contractor or engineer.
Of course.
Paperwork can be fudged. You can fake an invoice. It is much, much harder to fake a physical sample of material that has already been laid down.
That is wild. It completely changes the citizen's role from just a complainer to an auditor.
And because this text is from 2005, we have to appreciate the technology clause. It says you can obtain information in the form of diskettes, floppies, tapes, or video cassettes.
I love that. It's a little 2005 time capsule. Excuse me, could you please send me the budget on a floppy disk?
It sounds dated, but the principle behind it is timeless. Electronic data is information. If it exists on a server, you have a right to it. And one more crucial thing, you have the right to inspection.
Meaning I don't have to wait for them to mail me photocopies.
No, you can demand to physically walk into the office and inspect the works, the documents, the records yourself. You can sit there, go through the files, and take your own notes. You can take extracts. It completely removes the filter of the bureaucrat deciding what to send you.
Okay, so that's the pull method. I ask, you give. But there's a section here, section 4, that seems to suggest we shouldn't even have to ask in the first place. You called this the suo motu revolution.
Suo motu is just legal Latin for on its own motion. And Section 4 is the part of the Act that, frankly, is the most frequently violated, but it's also the most idealistic. It mandates that public authorities must publish 17 different categories of information proactively.
Within 120 days of the Act, right. So this should have all been done by, what, early 2006?
Correct. The idea was, why should a citizen have to file a request, pay a fee, and then wait 30 days just to know the salary of a public officer or the budget of a department? That should just be public knowledge by default.
The list is pretty exhaustive. It says they have to publish the particulars of the organization, the powers and duties of officers, the procedure for decision-making.
And the really sensitive stuff, subsidies. Section 4 mandates they publish the details of their subsidy programs, including the amounts allocated and the details of the beneficiaries.
That's huge for fighting corruption. If there's a list of people getting, say, housing grants, and I can just go online and see that half the names on that list are the village headman's cousins.
That's evidence right there in the public domain. Exactly. If Section 4 was perfectly implemented, the need to file RTI requests would probably drop by 50% or more.
So the fact that millions of RTIs are still filed is actually a sign that Section 4 isn't working as it should.
It's a symptom of the failure of Section 4, absolutely.
Okay, so let's assume the government hasn't published the info. I need to file a request. Section 6, this is the user interface of the law. How hard is it? Do I need a lawyer? Do I need to write it in some fancy legal English?
No, and that is the absolute beauty of it. The Act was designed for the common man. You can make the request in writing or electronically. And since we're looking at the Marathi Gazette, it explicitly says the application can be in English, Hindi, or the official language of the area, so Marathi in Maharashtra.
And here's the part that I think is the biggest game changer, the no reason clause.
Section 6, subsection 2. An applicant making requests for information shall not be required to give any reason for requesting the information.
I just want to pause on that for a second. Because in any other interaction you have with authority, the very first question they ask is, why do you want to know?
Right. Who are you? Are you a journalist? Are you some kind of lawyer? Why are you poking your nose in our business? The Act legally deletes that question.
You don't have to justify your curiosity.
You are the master. They are the servant. The master doesn't explain to the servant why he wants to see the accounts.
That is incredibly empowering. All I need to give them is my contact details so they can actually send me the reply.
That's it.
So I write my application, I put my 10 rupee court fee stamp on it, or whatever the fee is. I hand it to this person called the Public Information Officer, the PIO. And now the clock starts ticking. What's the deadline? Because government time usually means whenever we feel like it.
The Act kills government time. Section 7 sets a hard deadline, 30 days. The PIO must provide the information or reject the request for a valid reason within 30 days of receiving it.
30 days. Okay. That's actually reasonable, but what if it's an emergency? What if someone has been arrested illegally, or there's some medical emergency where knowing a government protocol could literally save a life? 30 days is too long then.
And that's where the Life and Liberty Clause comes in. It's a very, very dramatic proviso. If the information you're seeking concerns the life or liberty of a person, the timeline is slashed from 30 days to just 48 hours.
48 hours. That is lightning speed for a bureaucracy.
It is. It's the legislature acknowledging that, human rights trump administrative convenience. Now, using this clause is tricky. You have to prove the immediate threat to life or liberty, but just the fact that it exists is profound.
Okay, here's a scenario I'm skeptical about. I send my request to the Department of Health asking about a hospital budget, but it turns out that file is actually with the Department of Public Works.
Ah, the not my department shuffle.
Exactly. Usually this is where they'd reject me and say, wrong office, get lost.
The Act anticipated this. Section 6, subsection 3, says that if a PIO gets a request that belongs to another public authority, they can't just reject it. They must transfer the application to the correct authority within 5 days.
So they have to do the work.
Yes, and this is key. They must inform you, the applicant, that they've done so you're not left in the dark.
So they basically have to act as a forwarding service. That's almost customer service.
It shifts the burden of finding the file from the citizen to the government. You might have knocked on the wrong door, but the person at that door is legally required to guide you to the right one.
Now let's talk about money. We mentioned the fee is small, but what if the government tries to stall? What if they just sit on my file for, say, 45 days?
Well, Section 7, subsection 6 has a lovely little penalty for that. If the public authority fails to comply within the time limit, if they miss that 30-day window, they can no longer charge you for the information.
At all.
It must be provided free of charge.
So it's like the 30 minutes or it's free, pizza guarantee, but for democracy.
It is. And it denies them the ability to demand really high photocopying fees if they've been lazy or obstructive.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate here. There has to be a limit. The government can't tell me everything. I'm assuming I can't file an RTI for the nuclear lunch codes.
Of course not. Transparency isn't anarchy. And that's what Section 8 is for. Section 8 is the vault. It lists the exemptions. These are the specific grounds on which a PIO can legitimately say no.
And what's on that list?
The standard stuff you'd expect. Anything that harms the sovereignty and integrity of India, security, strategic, scientific, or economic interests of the state, relations with foreign states, you can't ask for the blueprints of a new fighter jet.
Makes sense. What about, say, personal privacy? Can I use this to ask for your tax returns?
No. Personal information, which has no relationship to any public activity or interest, is exempt. Unless, and the Act uses this phrase a lot, the larger public interest justifies the disclosure.
And there's also commercial confidence, trade secrets.
Right. If the government is holding a company's trade secrets, say the proprietary formula for a drug, they can't just hand it out. Also something called a fiduciary relationship, the trust between a doctor and patient or a lawyer and client. The government respects that.
Okay, there's one specific exemption here about cabinet papers. These are the discussions ministers have before they make a big decision. That's usually the ultimate black box of government.
It is. And the Act does say cabinet papers, including records of the deliberations of ministers, are exempt.
Yeah.
But there is a massive however.
Ooh.
They are exempt only until the decision has been taken and the matter is complete.
Oh, that's fascinating. So while they're in the middle of arguing about a policy, it's secret. But once they decide, okay, we are building the dam, the discussion becomes public.
Precisely. The reasons for those decisions, the material they were based on, all of that must be made public after the decision is taken. It prevents interference during the process, but ensures full accountability after the result. You can see who argued for what.
That is a very sophisticated balance. But I want to ask about the spies. I scrolled to the end of the document to the second schedule. It looks like a VIP list of organizations that just get a free pass.
It is. The Act says that, generally speaking, nothing in this Act applies to the intelligence and security organizations established by the central government. The list includes the Intelligence Bureau, IB, the Research and Analysis Wing, RA, the Border Security Force, BSF, CRPF.
So they're totally immune. They can do whatever they want, and we can't ask any questions.
That's what it looks like at first glance. But if you read the proviso carefully, there is a stunning exception. Even these powerful intelligence agencies are not exempt if the information pertains to allegations of corruption or human rights violations.
Wait, really? So if I have evidence that an officer in one of these agencies is taking bribes or that they've detained someone illegally, they can't just hide behind a national security shield?
No. For corruption, the Act applies, full stop. For human rights violations, you can get the information, but it requires the approval of the Information Commission, and they get a bit more time, 45 days instead of 30. But the door is not locked. It's just very, very heavy.
That is a critical loophole for justice. It means nobody is truly above the law. But, and here's the big but, we've talked about rights, timelines, exemptions. In the real world, bureaucrats can just ignore rules. What happens if the PIO just shreds my application? Or just laughs and says, I'm not giving it to you? Does this act have teeth, or is it just a paper tiger?
Oh, it has teeth, sharp ones. This is Chapter 6. The Act sets up an appellate system information commissions at the state and central level. But Section 20 is the real weapon. It introduces personal penalties.
Personal. You mean the officer gets fined out of their own pocket?
Yes. If the Information Commission decides that a PIO has refused a request without any reasonable cause, or malafidely denied it, or knowingly gave incorrect, incomplete, or misleading information,
Or just destroyed the file?
or destroyed it, the Commission can impose a penalty of 250 rupees for each day of delay.
Okay, I have to be the skeptic again. 250 rupees. That's less than a cup of coffee at a nice cafe. Does the senior government officer really care about that?
It sounds small per day, but it's capped at 25,000 rupees. Now, for a high-ranking officer, maybe 25K isn't bankrupting, but the Act specifies this amount must be paid by the officer, not the department.
Oh.
It often gets deducted directly from their salary.
So it actually shows up on their pay stub? That's gotta be embarrassing.
It is deeply embarrassing. It goes on their permanent service record. And on top of the fine, the Commission can also recommend disciplinary action under their service rules. It affects promotions. It affects their entire career. The stigma of a Section 20 penalty is often far worse than the money.
There is one last legal concept in this enforcement section that I think just completely flips the script on how we view justice. Usually, if I accuse you of something, I have to prove it.
The burden of proof, yes. In most laws, the burden is on the accuser. But under the RTI Act, in any appeal, the burden of proof lies on the public information officer to prove that they acted reasonably and diligently.
So if I say, you denied me information, I don't have to prove they were wrong. They have to prove they were right.
Correct. The default assumption of the law is you should have shared this information. If you didn't, you need to justify yourself. It puts the entire government machinery on the back foot right from the start.
That is the very definition of a power shift.
It really is. When you look at the whole package, the broad definition including physical samples, the strict deadlines, the no reason clause, and the personal penalties, it's a mechanism that was clearly designed to dismantle a century-old culture of secrecy.
So we've covered the document, we've looked at the mechanics, but what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about some gazette from 2005?
Because eventually, at some point, you will collide with the state. You will need a permit, a license, a refund, a repair. And when that day comes, you have two choices. You can be a subject and wait and hope for a favor, or you can be a citizen and use this tool.
And you don't need to be a big shot activist. You just need a pen, a piece of paper, and 10 rupees.
Exactly. Transparency isn't something the government gives you, it's something you take.
Before we wrap up, I just want to circle back to the vault, the secrets. We talked about how Section 8 locks things away, cabinet papers, strategic interests, all that. It feels like some parts of history will always be hidden.
Well, that brings us to a hidden gem in Section 8, specifically subsection 3. It's very easy to miss. It says that, subject to a few very specific exceptions like national sovereignty, for most of those exempt categories, including the cabinet papers and intellectual property, once 20 years have passed, the government must disclose the records.
The 20-year rule.
Yes. It basically implies that secrecy has an expiration date. Governments can hide the messy process of decision-making for a while, maybe to maintain stability or protect egos, but they can't hide it forever. The clock is always ticking.
So if a decision was made in 2005,
the files should be opening up right about now.
That is a powerful thought. History eventually belongs to the public. You just have to be patient enough or maybe just persistent enough to ask for it.
Precisely.
This has been a fascinating look at the Right to Information Act. It's dense, it's legal, but it might just be the most powerful piece of paper a citizen can hold. Thanks for helping us decode it.
My pleasure. Just remember, use it or lose it.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.